5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting live from the Newsmax studio in New York City. A fusion of politics, commentary, entertainment, and sports. Steve and his team bring you the latest news and opinion now. Here is Steve Malzberg.
Well, there's a certain level of vehemence, it seems to me, that's directed at me, directed at the president. People talk about taking their country back. I can't look into people's hearts, look into people's minds, but it seems to me that this president has been treated differently than others. There's a certain racial component to this for some people. I don't think this is the thing, is a main driver, but for some, there's a racial animus.
All right, folks, that's just some of what Eric Holder, our fine Attorney General, had to say in an interview. He also made some remarks about Sarah Palin and the Washington Redskins. Here to talk about all of that is Newsmax contributor, national affairs correspondent for National Review Online, and the author of the great new book, Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. We'll put it up on the screen. There you go. John, welcome. Always great to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in. It's no surprise. I mean, he's been down this road before, correct?
Well, the first few months he was in office, he said we were a nation of racial cowards. Eric Holder has an interesting view of history that's about 50 years old. When people say we want to take the country back, that's what Democrats and Republicans always say during campaigns. If he wants to think that that has some kind of racial component to it, it's bizarre. Actually, if you look at Eric Holder's record, he has polarized, politicized, and racialized the Justice Department more than any other Attorney General. Give you an example, the new Black Panther case. This was a case in which Black Panthers wearing military-style uniforms and carrying, side weapons were intimidating voters at a Philadelphia polling place. Bartle Bull, who formerly published The Village Voice, said it was the most obvious and ridiculous violation of civil rights he'd seen since Mississippi in the 1960s.
And he was down there.
And he was down there. So the Bush Justice Department, in its final days, prosecuted. Black Panthers didn't show up in court. We now know that perhaps they knew the fix was in because Eric Holder basically dismissed the case with almost no sanctions whatsoever. So that was a case in which clearly, if whites had been doing it, something very serious would have happened to them. Versus New Black Panthers, not so much.
It's almost surreal. I mean, you think back, it wasn't that long ago when that story broke, when this story happened. I remember the Fox News reporter, whose name escapes me at the moment, talking to these guys and everything. And you're right, the Bush Justice Department instituted the proceedings, and then Obama comes in, and it all went bye-bye. And here's something else. I mean, it was the New Black Panther Party, or whoever it was, but I don't remember, but that took out a bounty on George Zimmerman. A bounty on a guy who had not been charged or arrested or was not wanted by the police.
And who sent representatives down to Florida to attend the rallies organizing the protests against George Zimmerman. And now they're going after some float in Nebraska because it supposedly insulted the president.
Yes.
Look, Eric Holder also in this interview said, well, voter ID laws discriminate against minorities. Well, all the polls show overwhelming majorities of minorities support voter ID laws. Frankly, as Andrew Young, the former mayor of Atlanta and a civil rights leader, said, we're doing people a favor if we get them an ID because they can then enter the mainstream of American life. Eric Holder is suing, despite a Supreme Court decision saying states should not have to ask permission to change their election laws. He's suing North Carolina, he's suing Texas. Well, we have evidence now from Georgia and Indiana and other states that have used voter ID for almost a decade that it doesn't lower turnout. In fact, minority turnout has gone up in those states, and not just in presidential years. In South Carolina, the Justice Department's case was so weak, not only did the judge throw it out and agree to the state's voter ID law, but he ordered sanctions, fines against the Justice Department for pursuing what was basically a frivolous case.
Look at Mississippi, and you tell me, I'll ask you because you've written the books on these issues as well, specific to voting regulations and abuses. There's this question of whether or not the runoff results will stand because some of the Democrats who voted in the runoff may have voted in the Democratic primary. Well, but if you had voter ID, it would have been much easier, right?
Look, we have many complaints out of Mississippi. But Mississippi actually had instituted its voter ID law this election. Now, the sound you hear, which is crickets chirping, is all the complaints that came out because people had to show ID. Now, Obviously, the poll workers weren't skilled enough to go back and look at the history of that voter,
Right.
which would have taken time and all of that. So there may be problems with that election, but it wasn't problems in asking people to show an ID.
Again, for a Justice Department, and your book it just documents all of these cases, and I mean, we've had people, career Justice Department officials, you know, J. Christian Adams for one, he was a whistleblower, so to speak. He left, he blew the whistle that this Justice Department is not interested. I mean, here he talks about the animus, the racial animus that directed towards him and Obama. He's been held in contempt of Congress. He hints it's because he's black. Yet you have a Justice Department that, according to some who were in it, have no interest in prosecuting violations of the law when it's whites against, when it's blacks against whites, as evidenced by the Black Panther case.
It's not just J. Christian Adams. The Inspector General of the Justice Department found that in the Civil Rights Division, conservatives and non-liberals were harassed, hazed, called names, email campaigns were launched against them. We actually know,
Within the Justice Department.
We actually know some of the Justice Department personnel who did this behavior. And in fact, at least one was caught and found to have lied to federal investigators, which is a very serious crime. That person is still working at the Justice Department, and there's no evidence that any punishment whatsoever was ever given to her.
They didn't get a raise?
Well, I don't know about that, but we certainly know they didn't pay a price.
I'd like to say that's shocking, but it's not shocking.
So if you want to talk about raising the temperature, polarizing people, dividing us, this Attorney General is working for the divider-in-chief.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the IRS a little bit here. The Justice Department certainly could bring charges against Lois Lerner. They could, prosecute her, whatever.
There's an investigation, I hear, that's been going on for 14 months.
And isn't it by a woman who was a big contributor to the Obama campaign?
Was a contributor to the Obama campaign, not just in the general election, but actually in the primaries when he was an underdog against Hillary. So she's a longstanding Obama supporter. I know about 22 principals in the IRS scandal. As far as I can tell, 19 or 20 of them have heard nothing from the Justice Department after 14 months. This investigation may finally get underway in January 2017 when Barack Obama leaves office.
Yeah, with the new Justice Department head.
But two federal judges last week called out the Justice Department and basically said, you're not doing your job.
So I'll do it.
We'll do it.
Yeah,
or we'll appoint people who will make you do it.
They demanded the IRS show
Which is
records.
more than the Justice Department ever did. The Justice Department often, when it raids companies and suspect of a crime, they will seize the computers. They'll seize the hard drives. They'll seize the records. There's no evidence that the Justice Department has asked the IRS for anything or to secure those records. Far from the securing those records, they've apparently allowed a bunch of emails to go missing. You know, the dog ate my emails.
It is incredible. Okay, the Attorney General also weighed in. You know, Sarah Palin said it's time to impeach the president. He said that he and Sarah Palin was a bad vice presidential candidate, and she's even a worse judge on impeachment. But he also said this. Let's go to 67 about the Redskins.
I think the name ought to be changed. I think it is an offensive name. And the Redskins are, that organization is a great one. It's a team with a storied history that has huge amounts of support in Washington, D.C. And I think in the 21st century, they could increase their fan base, increase their level of support if they did something that is, from my perspective, so obviously right.
Steve,
the Redskins need fans, by the way.
This is the 21st century, I agree. We have modern scientific public opinion polling. American Indians, Native Americans have been asked about this. Big yawn. Many of them say, we don't normally name teams after things you don't like. I mean, you name teams after things that have some kind of positive image. And otherwise, why would you name the team that way?
Absolutely.
So we not only have polls showing that Native Americans don't mind this by overwhelming majorities, but the Patent and Trademark Office that took away the rights of the Redskins to their name did not have a single, not one, public complaint against the use of the term Redskins. So the Justice Department is saying this is an offensive term. Other than the left-wing agitators who are offended by everything, please give me the evidence where the offense is.
Well, what could he do to intimidate and make the life of the owner of the Redskins or the NFL miserable, in much the same way that you just alluded to earlier, that despite the Supreme Court decision, he's now suing to reinstate or to uphold parts of the Voting Rights Act that were struck down by the Supreme Court. How could he do that?
I think this just these public comments are a disparagement of reputation. I mean, when the top law enforcement official in the country says you're engaged in offensive behavior, and many of the people who watch your television and aren't aware of this issue on a daily basis hear this, they say, gee, Redskins bad. I don't know exactly why, but they're bad.
Yeah.
You know, disparagement of reputation can cost people out of business.
Yeah, well, I wonder if he could be sued for that. One more.
No, sovereign immunity.
That's true.
By the way, the reason Eric Holder will remain Attorney General throughout Obama's second term is if he were to quit, he would have a new occupation, Steve, permanent witness.
That's probably very true. Okay, one more. I mentioned the Zimmerman trial earlier. I realized yesterday or the other day, because they had Rachel Jeantel on CNN. God help us, I don't know why, but I have a gimme 5 on that coming up later. That investigation against Zimmerman is still ongoing by the Justice Department.
You know, they must really have a slow-walking team over there. I mean, I know that maybe their computers aren't completely up to date, and maybe they have the IRS email system. I don't know, but things happen awfully slowly. But all of this is in my book, Obama's Enforcer.
Absolutely.
The Eric Holder Justice Department, which I co-authored with Hans von Spackowski.
Great to see you, John. Thank you so much. Appreciate it always. All right, folks, there it is. Obama's Enforcer up on the screen. Get it and just learn just how insane this whole situation is. All right, when we come back, it's time for the Malzberg panel. We're going to discuss all of Eric Holder's remarks, and we'll take a look at the latest on the immigration front and the war between Israel and Hamas and what was said about it over the weekend by both sides. When we return, only here on the Steve Malzberg Show and only on Newsmax Television. Don't go away.